Um, so, I want to very briefly talk about three questions that I posted up on Twitter, um, and that I posted up responses to. And these are essentially going to be mainly repeats of what I've already written. So I apologize if you've already read that. There's really not much else you're going to get from this video, but I think it's just useful for me to have this out here. And I apologize beforehand because I look like shit right now. So I really apologize before that. And the lighting is not helping at all. And the camera angle is incredibly unflattering. And, it's just a shit show. So there's been a lot of in the year and a half in which I've had this channel and particularly the content type that I talk about, there's been a lot of sort of questions and confusion and projections as to exactly what it is I do and why I'm doing it. And so I think it's probably best just for me to explain my intentions. Whether that actually is effectively portrayed or not is, something that's up to you, and I really can't control that. The first major thing that I come across is always, well, who is my general audience? Because there's always this consistent disconnect that a lot of people have where they think I'm either reaching for a really broad audience or I'm reaching for such a super niche audience and so on and so forth. And that's actually a very fair concern. My general audience, honestly put, is just me. The entire point of the Pause and Select channel is this channel is essentially an electronic diary of content. And what I mean by that is that as I come across more information, as I come across more ideas, more perspectives, more applications of ideas, and so on and so forth, I want to try and understand those ideas through a medium that I particularly enjoy. And in doing so, I hope to perhaps sort of reveal a little bit more of myself through the videos that have been constructed. Because if you guys are watching this video, have seen my other videos on the secondary channel, I do try to be as absolutely careful and precise as I can with the video footage I use, more so than I used to before. I briefly talk about the Kuleshov effect not only in videos but also in manga panels. And anybody who's ever worked with me will know that I do try to provide as close of an approximation of footage and ideas as I possibly can. Oftentimes I don't succeed, but I try. Because I think there's a very personal element to these videos. There's a very personal dimension that sort of gets lost, and that is these videos are very much these ideas upon which I've come across that I found interesting, exciting, or very, very strange or tantalizing. And they're essentially my attempts to exercise and grapple with these ideas through the metaphor of the text in which has been presented towards to me. And for that reason, it's incredibly personal. They're essentially diary entries into sort of an intellectual journey I'm trying to undertake. And whether it's successful or not, is something that is borne out on the videos themselves, on the surface video themselves. And it's for that reason I think it's important that, you don't have to buy everything I peddle. You don't have to believe in everything I argue. Because I don't believe in a lot of the things I argue. I don't believe in a lot of the things. I mean, like, there's a lot of videos that I've put out that I don't believe in anymore because, they're constant renegotiations of particular states of me in lines of thought at very specific moments in time. And so, in this way, it's sort of a portfolio of theory as how I understand them, and sometimes I don't understand them. Sometimes I do understand them, and so they're incredibly personal pieces in a lot of ways because they're essentially just me trying to understand what I just been presented with. And I'm being very repetitive here, and it's for that reason, it's a very egotistical answer, but the audience I'm trying to aim for is in sort of a perverted mirror stage situation. It's me. I'm trying to sort of constitute this imaginary state in which I'm trying to figure out exactly what is it I'm looking at here and how is that constituted towards me. And again, as you can see, I'm just using Lacanian terms incredibly loosely, so I apologize for that. I'm going to go on to the next question here. But to clarify that, who is my general audience? Well, it's just me. And everybody's just kind of along for the ride. I just kind of make the videos for myself. And if I had no subscribers, I would probably still make these videos because I'm trying to sort of figure it out. Now, does that mean that I'm this distanced, aloof character that doesn't care about the success of my videos on our anime or its retweets? Oh no, absolutely. I absolutely care about that. I can't escape myself from the ego that has essentially been constructed through this system and structure. But I'm not trying to reach to a general audience. I'm not really trying to reach to a niche audience. I'm just trying to make content that is manifestations of whom I am at very specific points in my life. The second question that is often asked is, do I like the shows I talk about? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. A lot of the times I don't. I tend to talk more about shows I like because it's a little easier for me to sort of buy into the argument in which I present. However, there are also moments where I do think it's important to talk about shows I don't like. Overlord, for instance, is one. The reason why I talk about shows I don't like is because simply because I like it or not should not essentially remove it from at least trying to give it a fair critical look in some way. Whether the product of that look is ultimately something I buy or not, it ebbs and it ebbs and fades now and then. But I think it's important to try and be as fair as I can in the only way I know how. Now that said, I don't make particularly critical in the context of critique. I don't make critical videos, and the reason why is because I've mentioned it multiple times, but I believe that the reader is an incredibly important factor in understanding how a text resonates with people. And so people are going to have different reading practices, and they're going to be drawn to different things within a text. And therefore, it's not really that fair for me to essentially say, this is how I think a good text should be read, and this is how I think a bad text should be read. Because ultimately, people are going to come to their own conclusions. And therefore, really the only thing I can do is just talk about what I think is interesting about the text, even if I myself might not particularly like it. Because at the end of the day, whether you think something is good or bad is ultimately up to you. And what I say is really not going to affect, it's really not going to affect you that much. I really don't think it's going to affect you that much. I'm not some sort of authority on that, and I trust people are so particularly complex that they're going to come with very specific factors and variables and particular things that they enjoy. So I just talk about what I find is interesting and whatever ideas that sort of jump out at me. The last thing that I want to talk about is wording. A lot of people say, well, why do you use big words? Why do you use the words you do? There are two reasons, actually. The first one is lineage. So essentially, a lot of times, particular ideas have particular weight in specific context, and I sort of want to be as upfront and honest with where I get these words from, which is why I also oftentimes cite the articles and the texts that I use very specifically. The reason why is because if I'm reading something like, say, the ideological state structure, the ideological state apparatus as it has been presented by, say, Anne Allison, when she's talking about mothers and bento boxes, I want to sort of call back to Allison's work, because that's the work that ultimately influenced my thoughts that led me to that particular conclusion. And I think it's fair and open and transparent to essentially say this was the work that influenced me. And by attempting to reconstitute that in some particular way is useful and very helpful, but sometimes I'm not particularly confident that such a work needs to be reconstituted. Sometimes the ideas as they've been presented are so lucidly clear that that's really the easiest way to describe them. That's the simplest way to describe them because it hits at all the major points. And at the same time, I want to call back to that work. And so it does all of these things at once. I also really can't control people's diction. I mean, there comes a point where you can make something simpler, but I think people are always going to have issues. I mean, there is, for instance, how are you going to simplify a term like hegemony? Like, you can't. There is no simplification of hegemony because hegemony carries very specific connotations, very specific flows of thought associated with that term. There is no simpler term for a hegemony. The second one is precision, and that sort of ties back into my example with hegemony there. I try to be as precise as I can with my language, and sometimes I fail. Sometimes I absolutely fail. Sometimes I fail. And, by trying to sort of condense it, there are oftentimes particular nuances associated with that idea or with that construct that ultimately I don't want to risk losing. I mean, perhaps someone would argue that for the sake of the argument, it would be better to simplify that. But then again, that sort of falls back to my original point, which is I kind of don't care because once again, they're sort of the audience I'm speaking to is myself because I'm essentially trying to reconstruct these ideas in a way that really I can try and understand them. So in this context, I think it's more important to be precise with your language. I mean, I use the term for let's take an example. I use the title "Sweetness and Lightning's Counter-Hegemonic Masculinity," which is something a lot of people criticize my title for, and I think that's fair. But one alternative title that someone proposed was "Japan's Changing Fatherhood." Well, the reason why I don't like that particular title, though I appreciate the comment and the criticism associated with that title, I appreciate that. The reason why I didn't choose a title like that is because I didn't just talk about fathers. Fathers were the main currency in which the video revolves around, but it's meant to sort of tie back to a broader masculinity. That's why I used the example of Yagi. Yagi himself is a very interesting case study because he himself is a professional cook, and so therefore he acts as sort of a masculine fold, in contrast to Kohei, the father. And therefore, Yagi isn't a father, but Kohei is. And so if I'm talking about changing fatherhoods, it doesn't capture that particular point as sort of subservient as it is to the main point that I'm making. And so therefore I think the term masculinity more effectively captures this interplay. I use the term hegemonic because, as I said, there's no better term for the particular idea I'm trying to present than hegemonic structures. The normalization of particular ideological apparatuses. And that's incredibly important because I'm not trying to make it look like I'm being more, pretentious or anything than I actually am. I mean, like, there's obviously I can't stop me being pretentious if that's actually what's happening. But like that title example is literally, it is the clearest and most precise title I can conjure up for the thesis I'm trying to present in that specific video. And so, therefore, I think having specific words, even if they are a little bit more complex than what, lay audiences might be familiar with, I think it is important to have those words because they hit at very, very minute parts that are incredibly important to look at. If you don't want to slog, well, you've already slogged. Okay, never mind. I'm, I'm going crazy now. But I hope this clears it up, or at least sort of explains a little bit about why I do some of the things I do. Because I've been meaning to talk about this for a while, but I just never did for various reasons. But I hope you guys find it interesting. I don't know.